This was the most ambitious film ever made. It was meant to redefine cinema forever. But the version its creator intended was never seen. This is the documented story of Napoleon. Napoleon is a silent epic film released in 1927, directed by French filmmaker Abel Gance. At the time of its production, it was one of the most expensive, technically innovative, and artistically ambitious motion pictures ever attempted. The film depicted the early life of Napoleon Bonaparte and was conceived as the first installment in a massive multi-part cinematic saga. What survives today, however, is not the film Abel Gance originally envisioned. From the beginning, Napoleon was designed to push cinema beyond its existing limits. Gance planned a series of films that would follow Napoleon's life from childhood to death. The 1927 film was intended only as the opening chapter. To achieve this, Gance employed experimental techniques that were unprecedented in scale and complexity. Production began in 1925 and quickly became enormous in scope. Thousands of extras were used in large-scale battle scenes. Real military units were involved. Cameras were mounted on horses, sleds, and handheld rigs to create dynamic movement rarely seen in silent cinema. Gance rejected static composition in favor of kinetic energy. One of the most revolutionary elements of Napoleon was its use of multi-screen projection, known as polyvision. For the film's climax, 3 separate images were projected side by side, creating an ultra-wide panoramic effect. This technique anticipated widescreen formats by decades and required specially equipped theaters to present properly. The original version of Napoleon was not a single, fixed cut. Gance continuously revised the film, expanding and re-editing it for different premieres. Early versions ran well over 5 hours. Some estimates suggest that Gance envisioned a total running time exceeding 9 hours when including planned future installments. This extreme length immediately created problems. Theater owners were unwilling or unable to screen such long versions. Distributors demanded shorter cuts that could be exhibited more easily. As a result, Napoleon was repeatedly edited down without Gance's full control. International distribution further fragmented the film. Different countries received different versions, often drastically altered. Scenes were removed, reordered, or replaced. Tinting schemes, musical accompaniment, and projection formats varied widely. There was no single authoritative version. By the late 1920s, the arrival of sound cinema dramatically changed the industry. Silent epics became commercially risky. Interest in Napoleon declined rapidly. Planned sequels were abandoned. The film's original negative and many alternate versions were neglected or dismantled. Over time, substantial portions of Napoleon were lost. Original elements were discarded, damaged, or destroyed. Some sequences survived only in truncated form. Others disappeared entirely. Gance's intended structure, pacing, and visual rhythm were effectively erased. For decades, Napoleon existed only in heavily shortened versions. In some releases, the film was reduced to under 2 hours. The polyvision finale was often removed entirely. These versions bore little resemblance to the director's vision. Abel Gance continued to revise Napoleon throughout his life, attempting restorations using whatever materials he could locate. However, by mid-century, the film's original form was no longer recoverable. Too much material had been lost or altered. The most significant restoration effort began in the late 20th century under film historian Kevin Brownlow. Brownlow spent decades searching archives, private collections, and film vaults worldwide. He assembled surviving fragments, production notes, and alternate prints to reconstruct the film as accurately as possible. The restored version, first widely presented in the late 1970s and expanded in later decades, runs over 5 hours. It includes the polyvision sequence and attempts to reflect Gance's original intentions. Despite this, Brownlow has emphasized that the restoration remains incomplete. Many scenes survive only in damaged or inferior copies. Others are missing entirely. Editing decisions had to be inferred from notes and secondary sources. The restoration represents an approximation rather than a definitive version. Napoleon is therefore both a preserved masterpiece and a lost film. It survives, but not as originally conceived. The version audiences see today is the result of historical reconstruction rather than direct transmission. The loss of Napoleon's original form has broader significance. It illustrates how technological limitations, commercial pressures, and industry transitions can permanently alter works of art. Gance's vision exceeded the infrastructure of his time. Despite these losses, Napoleon remains one of the most influential films in cinema history. Its techniques inspired later filmmakers and anticipated developments in editing, camera movement, and widescreen presentation. The fact that the original version no longer exists in full has contributed to the film's mythic status. Napoleon is often described as a film that cinema was not yet ready to receive. Today, no audience can experience Napoleon exactly as Abel Gance intended in 1927. The original version is not hidden in a vault or awaiting rediscovery. It no longer exists as a complete entity. What remains is a reconstruction built from fragments, guided by scholarship and preservation efforts. It stands as a testament both to human creativity and to irreversible cultural loss. Napoleon's story is not merely about a single film. It reflects the fragility of cinema itself. Without deliberate preservation, even the greatest artistic achievements can be altered beyond recognition. Unless unknown materials emerge, Abel Gance's original vision of Napoleon will never be fully restored. The film endures, but the version that was meant to change cinema forever has been lost to history. To fully understand why Napoleon became fragmented and partially lost, it is necessary to examine the economic and technological conditions of the late 1920s film industry. Silent cinema was reaching its peak at the exact moment when sound technology began to dominate studio investment. Films that required specialized projection systems, extended running times, or non-standard exhibition formats were increasingly seen as liabilities. Napoleon required 3 synchronized projectors for its polyvision sequences, precise alignment, and trained projectionists. Very few theaters were capable of presenting the film as designed. This technical barrier alone made wide distribution impractical. Even theaters willing to attempt the presentation faced high costs and logistical risk. As a result, distributors pressured producers to remove or simplify polyvision sequences. In many markets, the triple-screen finale was replaced with a single image or removed entirely. This fundamentally altered the climax of the film and reduced its intended emotional and visual impact. Financial pressures further compounded the problem. Napoleon had already exceeded its original budget by a substantial margin. Each additional cut, re-edit, or reissue was driven not by artistic goals, but by commercial necessity. Over time, this process stripped the film of its original coherence. The arrival of sound cinema accelerated this decline. By 1929, studios were rapidly converting theaters to sound projection. Silent films, regardless of artistic merit, were considered obsolete. Napoleon was no exception. Prints were withdrawn, dismantled, or recycled for their silver content. Abel Gance himself was deeply affected by the fate of the film. Throughout his later career, he repeatedly returned to Napoleon, attempting new restorations using whatever elements he could locate. These efforts reflected both his commitment to the project and the impossibility of fully recovering what had been lost. Modern restorations, while extraordinary achievements of film scholarship, remain compromised. Missing footage had to be inferred. Editing rhythms were reconstructed from notes rather than surviving negatives. Music was newly composed to approximate original accompaniment. Each restoration represents an interpretation rather than a definitive version. Napoleon's fragmented survival highlights a central paradox of film history. The most ambitious works are often the most vulnerable. When artistic vision exceeds industrial capacity, preservation becomes precarious. Today, Napoleon is studied not only as a film but as a case study in loss. It demonstrates how cinema, despite its technological nature, remains fragile. Without sustained preservation, even landmark achievements can be permanently altered. The story of Napoleon underscores the importance of modern archival practices. It is a reminder that films do not simply disappear through neglect. They can be actively reshaped, reduced, or erased by economic forces. Napoleon was not destroyed in a single event. It was lost gradually, through cuts, compromises, and abandonment. What survives is remarkable, but incomplete. The original version of Napoleon, as envisioned by Abel Gance in 1927, exists now only in fragments, descriptions, and scholarly reconstruction. It is a film that changed cinema even in its absence.